The last week's been a truly enlightening experience. I think the quality of the talks has been quite extraordinary. Unfortunately, they've all been recorded professionally by Christopher Swan and his film crew. So despite the rather disappointing number of delegates, we have obtained a wealth of educational material that can be posted on our website and is available to anyone in the world who wants to view it. This conference was an instant conference in the sense that I didn't really start to concentrate on gathering speakers until after the first consultation at St. George's House, which was at the end of March. I felt, however, it was imperative to stage this event because I do believe that things are critical and that we have very little time to turn the situation around. Am I pressing the wrong way? Phoebe, who in my view made the outstanding presentation at St. George's House, mentioned that if the Greenland ice cap melts, sea levels will rise by 7 meters. Well, this isn't just a theoretical possibility. This slide actually shows ice loss from the Greenland ice cap, and the areas that are colored red have lost over 50 centimeters of ice. So these satellite images actually demonstrate that Greenland is beginning to fray around the edges. Here we have Antarctica, and you'll see that it is the western Antarctic ice sheet that is being mainly affected. And because it is located on land that is below sea level in many parts, it is particularly vulnerable to temperature changes, because people worry that the sea may actually get underneath the ice sheet. And if that melts, then that is another 6 meter rise. So 13 meters is 43 feet, and as Phoebe said, Windsor Castle is only 50 feet above sea level. What do we mean by irreversible climate change? Well, nothing is entirely irreversible, not over eons of time, but from the human perspective, climate change becomes irreversible when positive feedback mechanisms start to operate and thus aggravate a deteriorating situation. There are lots of positive feedbacks in the climate change scenario. The loss of albedo when the ice sheet melts, the dieback and plundering of the Amazonian rainforest, so that instead of being a net absorber, it becomes a net emitter of CO2. But by far the most worrying is the methane locked up in the tundra, the frozen tundra of the northern hemisphere. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas, far more potent than CO2. It's also natural gas and shale gas, and huge amounts of it are locked up in the northern parts of Canada and Russia. As global warming progresses, the tundra will no longer be permanently frozen, and methane will be released in catastrophic quantities. Currently, the world emits 10 gigatons of carbon per year. By 2300, more than 800 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent currently locked up in the tundra will have been released. When that happens, it really is game over. In the pre-industrial days, atmospheric levels of CO2 were 280 parts per million. Currently, they are 390 parts per million, and they're increasing at an accelerating rate, currently 2 parts per million per year. If levels go above 450, then the positive feedback mechanisms start to kick in with a vengeance, and at current rates, that will happen around 2040. The world has been trying to do something about this, but despite the best efforts of the United Nations, annual emissions of CO2 worldwide have gone up by 49% since 1990, and 1990 was the baseline year for the Kyoto Protocol. By any standards, that is a spectacular political failure. And because CO2 levels are going up, by the basic laws of thermodynamic physics, temperature is also rising. Now, climate change poses huge challenges, but it also presents huge opportunities. Although the coalition seems unable to appreciate the potential bonanza that awaits those industries that develop renewables, there are also considerable economic benefits for those firms that develop a low-carbon approach, implement sustainable policies, and recycle their waste. We just heard a wonderful example from Marks and Sparks. Sustainable methods of food production have the potential to massively reduce humanity's carbon footprint, as well as being better for the soil and for agriculture, as we heard from Patrick Holden this morning. In addition, for the first time in over 100 years, we have a real opportunity to escape from the straitjacket imposed by the internal combustion engine, and we can develop methods of transport that are low carbon, non-polluting and sustainable. Equally, power generation does not need to be based on massive power stations located miles away from the end user. 2/3 of the energy generated is wasted before it ever leaves the plant, and the long distribution lines make this macro method of generating power both inefficient and vulnerable to terrorist attack. Society needs to research and sponsor the development of small, locally based power generating units, as microgeneration is relatively safe from attack, considerably more fuel efficient, and capable of dealing better with big fluctuations in demand. Churches all over the British Isles need to think about their carbon footprint. The long axis of all churches face south. The roofs are ideal for the installation of solar panels. Challenges also face the scientific community. One is to find better methods of storing power than using batteries, and compressed air, as illustrated by Kent Walwyn in the film yesterday, is a very good example. A second is to develop a method of carbon capture that actually works. A third is to use paints on the surface of buildings that reflect heat when it's sunny and absorb heat when it's cold. A fourth is to use biomimicry in buildings to avoid the need for air conditioning. As Chris Swan told us, the design of Portcullis House next to the Palace of Westminster is based on a termite mound. Fifth, we need to think laterally when it comes to air pollution. Nanotechnology has allowed the development of titanium-coated clothing that catalyzes the breakdown of polluting gases such as oxides of nitrogen into harmless water-soluble nitrates. Professor Tony Ryan from Sheffield University has calculated that if enough people in Sheffield have their clothes dry cleaned using this titanium-based method, then air pollution levels in Sheffield would fall to within the EU limits. If it can work for air pollution, there's no reason why nanotechnology cannot be applied to removing CO2 from the atmosphere. We also need to think laterally when it comes to taxation. It would obviously make sense if Her Majesty's government derived a greater part of its revenue from taxing energy use rather than income. The standard objection is that the poorest households will be worst affected. But how about introducing an escalating cost so that the more energy used, the higher the cost per unit of energy? Low energy users would thus be protected and could even be subsidised, whereas high consumers would be penalised, and for profligate users, they would be heavily penalised. This would provide powerful incentives for consumers to insulate their houses. Oil companies should be investing hugely in these areas of research, instead of plundering the earth in search of yet more fossil fuels in the shape of shale gas and tar sands. Whatever President Obama may have said about the shale gas in his State of the Union address in January, the truth is that shale gas is incompatible with the development of a low-carbon economy that our planet so desperately needs. What we do need to do is to fit effective carbon capture technology to our current fossil fuel powered power stations. The most exciting talk of this conference came on Wednesday afternoon to an audience of 5, and it came from Finland. And Kuchoi have developed a revolutionary method of carbon capture. And what they do is to take feldspar, which is the commonest mineral in the Earth's crust, they mix it with water. It can be any water, it can be seawater, and they combine it with carbon dioxide emissions. And that produces saleable products. It produces bicarbonate water, which can be used for irrigation. It can be converted into calcium carbonate and used as bricks. Or it can produce lithium carbonate, depending on the feldspar that's used. In addition, they get out quartz sand, which is usable for the building industry. They get out aluminium, which you can use to construct anything you like, from buildings to cars. And they get out valuable rare minerals. These are just a list of the minerals that they extract using this process. The other extraordinary thing about this process is that they can actually use the water as drinking water if they filter it. So you start off with seawater and you end up with drinking water. So this is not just a carbon capture technology, it's also a desalination process. And that was by far the most exciting presentation, I think, of this conference. I tried to interest the Today programme in this, absolutely no interest at all. The point that I'm trying to get across is that climate change is not just doom and gloom. Certainly there are problems, and if we don't deal with these problems, then it could prove terminal for human civilization as we know it. But there's also hope, and this is best exemplified by the figure of Joseph. To solve climate change, we need to enlist the help of at least 4 groups: the church, the royal family, business, and NGOs. These 4 groups support the self-evident scientific truth by reversing Einstein's famous formula, mc squared equals E, where m stands for multitude, as in world population, C2 stands for carbon per capita, that's carbon output per head of population per year, and E stands for extinction of species, or, if you prefer, the end of human civilization as we know it. This kernel of scientific certainty is then disseminated to humanity by campaigning groups such as Planetary SOS, through media and film, but most importantly via C6, a coalition of clued-up citizens concerned about climate change. I believe that C6 will be massively influential because it will involve the World Wide Web, social networking, Facebook and Twitter. In this illustration, C stands for citizens, but it could equally well stand for consumers or clients, customers, or even children. The potential to network virally, boycott firms that pursue unsustainable practices, and reward those that do not is almost limitless. When humanity gets the message, politicians at the top will follow. If there's one thing that I've learned after 30 years of involvement in environmental issues that impact on human health, it is that politicians only adopt an issue when it is in their interest so to do. By and large, politicians are not leaders. They are scientifically illiterate, intellectually lazy, and disinterested in anything that is labelled radical or presented as controversial by the media. Despite numerous invitations, not a single politician agreed to speak at this conference, and only one politician, Mary Creagh, who is the environment spokesman, shadow environment spokesman, attended any of the 3 seminars at Windsor Castle. But of course, when the world sea levels rise 45 feet, then even politicians will notice. So we cannot rely on them. Humanity has to create a climate whereby politicians have no choice but to take the right decisions on climate change. The question remains, can we achieve this in time? Because I sincerely believe that we have only a few years before climate change is set on an irreversible course. Thank you very much.